Well, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar in our series of First Nations focus on family and relationship services. I'm Jackie Brady and I'm the Executive Director here at Family and Relationship Services Australia, and I'm delighted to be here with you today and continuing this important conversation with you all. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. And for myself, I live and work on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I pay respects to the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land, and I do recognise any other people or families with connection to the lands of the ACT and surrounding region. As this is a national webinar, I would also like to recognise the traditional custodians of the lands and waters right across Australia and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people online with us today. We recognise and value the deep knowledge systems, cultural practices and enduring connection to land, waters and community that continue to guide and inspire work in the family and relationship services sector. For me today, I am going to be introducing Anne-Marie and Alister for our webinar, and they will be talking about the amazing work that they do at Maranguka. So Alister is the founder and executive director of Maranguka, which is the first Aboriginal-led place-based model of justice-free investment in Australia, based in Bourke in northwest New South Wales. Maranguka, meaning care for others in language, has been under Alister's leadership since 2013, and its growth is driven by his vision of better coordinated support to vulnerable families and children in Bourke through community-led teams working in partnership with existing service providers. Anne-Marie Mioche has been the CEO of CatholicCare Wilcannia-Forbes since 2017, and during her career, Anne-Marie has worked at senior levels at the Commonwealth Public Service in the Department of Health. Anne-Marie headed a task force that was responsible for developing Australia's first national strategy for the prevention of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide. She has extensive knowledge of government policy, including those relating to rural and remote issues and challenges relating to the lives of First Nations. So thank you very much, Alister and Anne-Marie, for being here today. We're here to hear from you, not from me. So I'm going to sign off right now and hand over to you, and then I will come in at the end to assist with any questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, and I'll take the lead just to highlight, I guess, but first I just wish to acknowledge particularly our elders, past, present and emerging as well, and pay my respects to traditional owners right across this wonderful nation. With that said, I just, in terms of the background and context, I like to think that I didn't found Maranguka, that it founded me, I guess, and set me on a new trajectory for the future. And I'm just mindful in terms of Maranguka itself. It's from the Nyingba language, from our traditional owners in Bourke, and that's at least 45,000 years old. So the relevance of it for the past 45,000 years is just as relevant as it is now and moving into the future. So with that said, the first opportunity, I'd like to acknowledge Anne-Marie, of course, and the wonderful work and the support and continued support that CatholicCare provides to Maranguka, along with many others, and there's just far too many to mention today, unfortunately. But with that said, in terms of the context of what we had decided to take on, was a massive task of improving service delivery and implementation from a cultural perspective, as it weren't quite reaching the community expectations that the community had, and we were always the eyes in the hills, and particularly as a community, it was like the reality of being resource rich and outcome poor was quite alarming and equally concerning. So we made attempts to roll the sleeves up and chose not to be eyes in the hills any further, and I guess, roll the sleeves up to get our hands dirty and do our part and meet, I guess, the best intentions and well-intentioned to make such a change, particularly from a service delivery and implementation perspective. So with that said, and what's always been missing is the cultural voice, as you would appreciate. So we've now been quite instrumental in changing some of that around now, as you may be familiar with shared decision making. So we're quite instrumental in the design of that and the co-design of that, what that currently looks like, particularly from a Stronger Places, Stronger Peoples initiative, which Bourke, under Maranguka's leadership, with the support of the Bourke Tribal Council, that provides the legitimacy and the governance authority, a cultural authority to, I guess, to operate and to make those necessary changes. But it's also with the through a lens of systems change, systems reform, and systems transformation. So that's really important to keep in mind, and putting, of course, is children and young people and families at the core of what we do, which is underpinned by a much broader, ambitious, courageous, longer-term strategy, which I'll refer to as growing our kids up to be safe, smart, strong strategy. Now that's been in place now for well over several years now, and it's certainly taking place now to make much more of a difference in the short, but intermediate, medium, long term as well. So, and I apologise, I tend to ramble on. I won't put people through that today, but I might just, on that note, just pause and hand it over to Anne-Marie as well. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Alister. I'll just say a few words about CatholicCare, and then I'll go on to talk about the collaboration between Maranguka and CatholicCare over the past decade. So CatholicCare Wilcannia-Forbes is, we operate across 400,000 kilometres in the western part of New South Wales. So basically anything west of Forbes and Parkes, and obviously up to Bourke and all the way down to the Victorian border. And we've got about 120 employees across 15 hubs. We try not to deliver in a drive-in, drive-out, because it's not what the communities where we work want. So we have these hubs in order to, you know, be a face, be part of the community. We always try and hire in community, and about 35% of our team members, including on our management team, identify as Aboriginal. So I first met Alister about 10 years ago, and I was fairly new to the job at the time, and I was visiting Bourke, and we were approached by Alister and a couple of other men, and what they were sort of asking us is, could they use a convent that Sisters had recently vacated, and they explained that they wanted to use it as a men's space, and that Maranguka had a number of goals around achieving certain things for men, but they were finding it difficult to make progress because basically men didn't have a place to meet. So that seemed like a reasonable proposal, but it wasn't ours. And so people always think the Catholic Church is one thing, but actually it's more of a kind of medieval setup where there are lots of different little entities, and it's like having rich relatives. You know, you might have a millionaire relative, but it doesn't mean that you're rich, and they don't necessarily share. So as it turns out, though, luckily, the Sisters had actually left the property to our bishop, and our bishop has a long-standing and deep commitment to working with Aboriginal people and communities. And so when it was put to him that this space could be used in that way, he said yes. And so we were able to progress to create a space that would become a men's space, and basically be a place where they could meet and carry out any activity that they wanted to carry out as a group. The interesting thing about that is that the Bishop made us responsible for things like maintaining the grounds and things like that. And obviously we work with Maranguka around the meeting of the men's groups and things like that. So from that moment on, it was kind of, well, I certainly didn't realise, but it more or less meant that we were joined at the hip. And so what happened around that men's space and what started to build the trust was that, for example, there might be an infrastructure thing where we would apply for funding to get the walls painted up, because obviously it had been it needed repair and so on. And then, you know, there might be an organisation that was willing to give funding to Maranguka to do things like a men's shed. They wouldn't be willing to fund us because we're not an Aboriginal organisation. So over the decade, basically, we've run all these kind of joint projects there, sometimes Maranguka finding money to do something, sometimes us finding money to do something, and basically working together in that way. And from that moment on too, Alister wanted to set up an MOU, and we did that. And you know, that was kind of, I suppose, the more formal foundation for our relationship. I have to say that I'll never, ever forget the launch of that space. There was, I don't know, maybe 100 people that turned up, including some very senior public servants. And what happened was that there was a smoking ceremony, because it's actually got quite large grounds outside, and the bishop had his, you know, incense things. And what happened was that they created smoke together, and all the people who were there had to walk through the smoke. And it was a really, really special kind of magical moment. And I remember even some of the hardened bureaucrats sort of coming up to me afterwards and saying, gosh, that was really, really moving. So that space, I think from that moment, was something really special. And over the time, we've built it together. There's a men's shed, there's a healing space for men, and there's been all sorts of community events that have taken place there. So that was the beginning of our relationship, and I suppose our working together, and it went really well. So, you know, when that happens, we were able to continue to build on that. However, a couple of years down the track, there was a bit of an interesting challenge, because I think it was DCJ in New South Wales wrote to us and basically said, you need to sign on to the Maranguka principle and you're going to have to start sharing your data. Well, you can imagine how that went down with community organisations. And that's not a racist thing. It's actually that, as you all know, we're set up to be very competitive with each other. We don't share stuff because basically, you know, our neck's on the line all the time in terms of our future funding. So I remember thinking, well, that's interesting. And I was having conversations with Alister at the same time, and he's saying to me, you know, in the future, we will determine who runs services in town. And I'm thinking, what? They're a little auspiced organisation funded literally on the smell of an oil rag. And this is what he's telling me. And then I started thinking about it and I thought, actually, we say we're pretty good and we think we're pretty good. And surely it's perfectly a good idea if the people who live in Bourke actually decide who it is that's running services. And if you're not running a good service, why shouldn't you be asked to leave town and another service provider can come in and do a better job? So, but it was, I suppose at the time, again, a challenging thing because, again, it's that protectiveness about our funding, but also this tiny little kernel of an organisation that was actually already, Alister was sort of reading the writing on the wall in terms of what was coming in the future. So I think in the end, we were the first organisation to sign on to the Maranguka principles, and actually they align very nicely with CatholicCare's principles. One of our principles is serendipity, and that means that the people at the local level are the better ones to decide their fate, and they're the people who are best placed to make decisions about their lives. So we signed on to the Maranguka principles, and that included the fact that we promised that we would share our data, which we did do right away, as did one other organisation, which was the Early Childhood organisation in Bourke. And all the others signed on, but none of them shared the data. And I don't think none of them even looked at the principles. So that's an interesting lesson because I think a lot of those organisations, it's 10 years down the track now, and they're probably saying all the right words, but, words have to translate into action. And we are committed to, I suppose, applying those principles, not just in Bourke, but actually across the board in the way that we work in Aboriginal communities. As it turns out, it was an amazing thing because Maranguka at the time was holding like a youth group, a men's group and an early childhood group, and service providers who were involved in delivering these services could attend. And you'd turn up and you would be given a 2-page pamphlet on, say, early childhood, and it would have all the data about, how many little kids there are in Bourke, who's attending the preschool, who's attending play groups, with the older kids, if there were any behaviour issues, if there was anyone who was missing school. You'd get all that data, which was absolutely amazing and beautifully presented. And I was always very jealous of the way Maranguka could put together this data, and we never did, we never could. So, and we still don't. And now they have a much, much better database, and that's around data sovereignty, controlling the data so that they decide what's needed in town based on data, and then they can decide how the services will be designed around that. So that's actually incredibly exciting, and it's good for Maranguka, it's good for the people of Bourke, but it's actually really good for organisations like ours, because we need that data in order to deliver the services in the best way possible and to know for sure that we're doing a good job and we're having an impact. So then COVID hit, and I suppose COVID for me was a really stark, sad example of why an organisation like Maranguka really needs to be in every single little remote town, because there were 2 places where we operated. One was Wilcannia, obviously, the other was Bourke. And in Wilcannia, the intervention there when COVID hit was just awful. It was more or less the army moved in, the roads were blocked, people didn't have free movements around the town. They were trying to do things like hunt kangaroo to give to the families where some people were sick. And the health people said, no, that's not gone through an abattoir. You can't do that. They used to shine lights on the vans that they'd brought in for the sick people in isolation. It was just horrendous. And we had resources at the time that we could have put into Wilcannia, but because there wasn't a group like Maranguka, I couldn't get accurate information about what was needed. We were getting all this conflicting information about, is it baby formula, is it, so we couldn't get a straight answer as to what was required. And until our bishop went there, because he went there, he managed to get in through his police contacts, and he spent 2 weeks there during the worst of it, and then he was able to relay to us live information about what was required, and then we worked with other organisations to supply that as we could. And in Maranguka, the difference was that, I think they must have had about, other than Alister, about, 2.1 people on staff, but everybody did turn to Maranguka, including us, and said, what do you need? So, of course, it was a huge demand on a tiny little organisation, but they managed it. And basically they gave us instructions, we require you to do this, and they tell another organisation something else. So it was much more community controlled, and it wasn't damaging in the way that it had been in Wilcannia. So for me, that was really a kind of a test of how important it is to have strong lead ACCOs like Maranguka is in Bourke. So and as a result of that, services were able to be delivered in Bourke in a way that was kinder and more culturally appropriate. So what happened then was a little while later, and we had a phone call from a police detective, and he basically sort of said to me, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm fairly new here, but, there's these little kids that are running around the streets at night, and they're only little, and it's winter, and, they're still outdoors, and he was saying, and until all hours of the night, and he was saying, and they do things. They get into a little bit of trouble, so they'll light up a fire, and then the sale court in the park caught on fire, and so now we're getting flack from the community because of these little kids. And so I said to him, did you speak with Maranguka? And he said, oh, no, I don't really know them. And I think in general, in a lot of these little communities, the police are not always comfortable about dealing with Aboriginal organisations. So I said to him, well, you can't do anything in Bourke without speaking with Maranguka. They're the lead organisation, the lead ACCO. So we set up a meeting, and it ended up becoming like a big work group where we looked at what was happening with the little kids and so on, and why it was happening, and who was meant to be delivering services in Bourke. Well, there was one large organisation that was meant to be delivering services in Bourke because we did a big audit, but the government was giving them 60 cents to cover 400,000 kilometres. So they didn't get to Bourke, and it wasn't because they were doing a bad job. It was just because with the money they got, they couldn't deliver there. So we did have a program which was looking at children who are at risk of homelessness and trying to reconcile them with their family. So we contacted DSS together with Maranguka and asked them if we could redesign that 9 to 5 service to an after-hours kids van service that would hand out meals and activities to the kids. So we knew that they'd gotten a decent meal and that there were activities, so they would be, accidentally setting fire to things and getting into mischief. And DSS, they want to go back to this, by the way. This is what they told us last week. But at the time, you could ring them, talk to them about a contract, why it wasn't working, and they would modify if it sort of fit along their own guidelines. So they gave us permission to do that. The van came from Maranguka, so that was another example of collaboration because we didn't have it. We had a social enterprise cafe at the time, so the meals came from that, and our 9 to 5 service basically became a really very, very popular, well-received, incredibly well-attended kids van, which was run after hours. So that was another example of collaboration with Maranguka, and actually in that case collaboration with a whole lot of other agencies in town to to deliver that outcome. In more recent times we have worked with Maranguka around tenders, and Maranguka obviously being the lead ACCO in Bourke and having an interest in particular areas like around families is very well placed to win some tenders and deliver services, which Maranguka did not do in the past. We have a no poaching agreement because in little towns like Bourke, it's not helpful for one organisation to be pinching the staff from another. But we do that in a very positive way. So if something is a real opportunity for someone, we can always have a discussion and progress that. But it's not just willy-nilly poaching, because we found that that's detrimental to both organisations. The other thing that we do is Maranguka now does run a DV service. We were always the main DV provider in town. And what we've done with that is co-locate our services out of the same house, of safe house. And that means that clients can come and they can choose to deal with a Maranguka worker or with our worker or with both. And they don't have to repeat their stories multiple times. It's all joined up. And that's working well out of a safe house which we manage. Also in more recent times, and I suppose this is more of a concern that we have, Maranguka has grown. They're now a company, a fully fledged company, so they're no longer auspiced, and they've done all that work to become a company. And now they are being given funding by government. And with governments at the moment, it's kind of ready or not, here it comes. And that, to my mind, can be not that helpful. So in order to run services successfully, a number of things have to be in place. And if you've been a small organisation run on the smell of an oil rag, and now potentially you're going to get a lot of money very fast, you need some really strong governance systems. So more recently, that's what we've shared with Maranguka, like our governance systems. and basically anything they wanted, anything that we had that was useful to them, we've given to them. And that's ongoing. Like we still, obviously still doing that. It's that kind of a relationship, and it can cover anything at all, you know, like any aspect at all. Sometimes it's just advice, and sometimes it's actual physical systems or things. So it sounds in some ways like, I suppose what I wanted to emphasize, like we're giving Maranguka a lot, but actually I feel like, if anything, we've gotten more out of this than what we've been able to give Maranguka, because firstly, in terms of understanding Aboriginal communities, understanding Aboriginal leadership, and delivering services in a more culturally appropriate way. Certainly Maranguka has totally challenged us to do that, but challenged us in a way that has been wonderful, in that it's been really constructive, and you know, they sort of, I suppose, have helped us to get to where we needed to through the challenging concepts and conversations. So it's been a really, really great process, and I've learnt a lot, very, very much a lot. I've learnt about Aboriginal leadership, how it's very inclusive, how it's very humble. I mean, Alister will always, you know, give the credit to someone else, but actually a lot of it does sit with him as the visionary for a lot of what's happened. And over the years, I suppose one of the things that sort of shouldn't have surprised me, but did, it took me a while to get on the money with what Alister was talking about. At first, I didn't even understand a lot of what he used to say, but right from the start, he had this vision. And the vision for Maranguka is for all the people of Bourke, not just Aboriginal people in Bourke. And it encompasses everything from water rights to economic development, to the social services. So our conversations were about social services, but actually he was already onto a whole lot of other things across all those sectors. And I think that's a really, I think it's a really interesting, and I can learn a lot from that leadership. The other thing is that the vision that was set for Maranguka is so inspiring. I mean, Alister doesn't bother with close the gap, because that's all about like a negative mindset, if you like. Oh, you know, we have to make sure there aren't as many baby deaths. We have to make sure that kids stay in school. The vision is actually a positive vision. It's about, this is where we need to be with our people in the community. So it sets the bar higher, and it's really inspiring. And you know, we all know if we deliver social services that it's not a straight line. We have some wins, we have some losses. Sometimes you think, am I making any difference? Like, is it helping? But to have a vision like that is actually really helpful in terms of keeping our eye on the ball. And the ball's not down here, it's up there. That's where the ball is, and that's what you aim for every single day. So I found it really amazing to be part of that. And the fact that we're included in that vision, we are part of that vision. If we're willing to come on the journey, then we're part of that vision. That's shared with us, and that's a real gift. So, you know, I suppose circling back to that little tiny project, which was the men's shed, we've now managed to get some small portable units that are going to be put on there. We've got the spiritual space. So it's really evolved, and I suppose it's a good metaphor for the relationship between CatholicCare and Maranguka, and I'm very, very grateful for it.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Alister. Alister, did you have any other sort of part of your presentation at the moment that you wanted to add, or are we moving into Q&A sort of format?
Yeah, look, I think before we just merge to Q&A, I think it's important to highlight and certainly emphasise the power in, I guess, the relentless collaboration that we've really managed to, that's evolved over many years. I'm just mindful in terms of, I've got a 27-year relationship with CenterCare before they rebranded becoming CatholicCare, and so it's been a long journey, and there's been a lot of water under the bridge. And I think over the last 10 years, it's really evolved to, I guess, to something that's really meaningful and with a strong purpose. And I think we're clearly demonstrating what that collaboration, or the power in collaboration, is. So I just thought I'd just take the opportunity to emphasise that before we go to Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks, Alister. And I think that was actually one of the questions that I was going to ask, because what you've painted really over the last decade is the journey that you've had, Anne-Marie, and Alister, you've just certainly made known there that your connection to the agency went on far beyond that time frame. So it has been a learning journey really along the way. But also, just to reflect the size and scale of your development, Alister, I think is important in the context. So I think, Anne-Marie, you said that you had like 2 staff or something, Alister. How big is your operation these days?
Well, we have a team of 15.
Yep.
And I mean, that's constantly growing into additional staff as new programs come on board. But I think what's really important too is that we're making the clear distinction between holding, I think, not only government but services to account, but it's also that mutual accountability. And I guess Maranguka is well placed to be that conduit between community and bringing community along as part of the journey, making those, what's really important is those informed decisions when they're required, rather than just turning up and making ad hoc, expected to make ad hoc and urgent sort of decisions without the evidence or the relevant information that that provides, the lack of information, etc., to make an informed decision. So we align that also with data as well, which makes it so much easier to. Now, I'm also mindful with people that may have their varying learning styles with numeracy literacy as well, though we also cater for that cohort in community as well to ensure that they understand and can interpret the information that we're tabling as well. And so no one's expected to make any sort of hasty decisions without it being really informed, and there's a general consensus.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that became clear too, is really the importance of the data sharing, and that helps you to make your decisions along the way. As we know, we are in I suppose an era where there's a lot of conversation going on about partnerships between what we'll refer to as mainstream organisations and ACCOs. And in reality, this has also been, I suppose, a conversation that's gone on for a long time. So we've heard about your relationship in working with each other. What do you think is really at the nub of making these sorts of arrangements work? Like, what are the key? I think for me, it's often about the people. So if I look at you, Alister and Anne-Marie, it's very much, the last 10 years have been shaped around your ability to make that connection. But I've been around in the social services sector for too long. I'm too old now. But often when you see the leaders leave, sometimes the systems break down. So we're not here. We're not, we're all going to move on or do whatever somewhere along the way. So whilst not undermining the importance of the relational value between the two leaders that are involved in driving this, how do you build the systemic infrastructure to make sure that the strength of your connection lives on beyond when you move on from the organisation?
Yeah, and that's very, I think that's extremely important to highlight as well, Jackie, because just speaking from my experience is that, and I've experienced that on many occasions like yourself and others, of course, in terms of that corporate knowledge that you build up and that you have in your own sort of personal and professional vaults, I guess I often refer to them as, when people move on, all that corporate knowledge goes with them. So we've identified that some time back. So what we do now is that we look at filling the void, ensuring that people do a more of effective handover process, that as new leadership comes into the leadership table, that they're fully aware and familiar with how things operate and how they work in Bourke, etc. So that's been quite helpful. There's been some, of course, struggle and quite challenged by that, because it's a new way of doing business, and clearly putting a community agenda above everything else, because it's community that's at the centre of this, as the beneficiaries as well. And often, as you would appreciate, is that when things aren't so well in community, it's often community that gets blamed for that. So I think in terms of the blame game, we've managed to now to address that. We run quite an effective cultural competency introduction that really dials people into that work, and with the cultural knowledge of who's not everyone's just tarred with the same brush. We have 27 different language groups that call Bourke their home, including the Torres Strait Islander community, including our neighbouring tribes as well. And so it's really important. I guess it's how inclusive we've been, and that it's a really non-invasive, a respectful way of developing and hitting pause and resetting, and setting a new sort of pathway when it comes to relationships and partnerships. And we've really formed that up through an effective collaboration agreement, because what the collaboration agreement does, it clearly illustrates and demonstrates whether it's short-term, intermediate, medium, long-term aspects to whatever people are contributing to over a period of time as well. So that's how we manage community expectations. And we have services come and go, because what dictates that is the funding cycles attached to that. So as you would appreciate, we do have short-term programs, but it's how we dial and seek the support of, in this case, the Bourke Tribal Council, to provide their endorsement to an agreement to how those services operate locally as well. So and making the clear distinction between the role of the Bourke Tribal Council and Maranguka from an operational perspective. If Maranguka has the operational and business end, that that's our key objective and purpose. And for Bourke Tribal Council, it's more the strategic and political side of it that manages that. So, but that works. I'm the first to admit there's certainly room for improvement as we're evolving and etc. So what we will be seeking relatively soon is the goodwill of who may be interested in being part of a new initiative to clearly identify and help us develop a practice guide around, I guess, the coordination and having that process more effective. And what I'm referring to is that we're all I guess familiar with the corporate and commercial side of corporate governance, but also the community governance attached to that. But the missing piece to the puzzle has always been that the cultural governance and the cultural authority to that process. So I'd really extending the olive branch to look at who may be interested in an initiative that we could sort of jointly develop, and to put much more visibility on how that works. And certainly a case study and a testimonial to that would be how CatholicCare in Maranguka is working in the first instance. But I'm also familiar that collaboration sort of more broadly varies across the landscape. But now we're starting to see that sort of come through, and from other sites and locations throughout in other states and territories as well, which we've been instrumental in instigating a lot of that, working differently and doing things differently.
Thank you. Thanks, Alister. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I would just add that for at CatholicCare, for us, it's often about values, like shared values. And with Maranguka and with Alister being the leader there, in my relationship with Alister, we've always, I suppose there's you know, Alister's always delivered on what he said, and I think he would say the same about me, and I think that's really important. But in our case, I think because the relationship's been going on for a decade now, the collaboration's actually embedded in practice. So we still got the Men's Centre, which obviously is kind of a collaborative project. You know, sometimes Maranguka does things, sometimes we do things. With our men's behaviour change program, it's the Maranguka men worker that actually co-runs the groups there. With the domestic violence, they run out of our safe house, the jointly run. Obviously, there's things like the school programs, and there's a whole lot of other examples where that collaboration is now, it's not just words on a page, it's embedded in practice.
Thank you. We've only got about 2 minutes. It's amazing how the time flies. But if anyone has a question online, Lisa.
So it's just a really quick one around. Is there any words of wisdom for other NGOs wanting to start something like this arrangement that you guys have developed?
I'm more than happy to touch on that. I'll attempt to highlight some of the options, and I think one of those would be, one is the readiness, and secondly is the preparation. And I think, and that's something that, just circling back to my earlier point around wanting to seek a partner in developing a practice guide around that. It could be sort of stepped out in terms of what's involved in terms of readiness, preparation, but also, I guess, is the ensuring that community is obviously at the centre of that, making those decisions. Now, and I'm just mindful with those good, bad, and indifferent sort of approaches that we need to be clear in terms of what we're aiming for. And what I often do is ground that conversation by reminding people our purpose and objective is putting, children, young people and families at the centre, and no one argues, no one differs with that or opposes that. So that I hope that maybe some help, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alister. So thank you. We are at 1:15, which is our closing time. So thank you both very much. And I'm sure that we'll keep you informed of how many people are jumping in and having a listen to what you say. But certainly in these times that we are, we have a government that's very much committed to ensuring that Aboriginal community-controlled organisations are more at the centre of the work that they do and lead in their community, and exploring what that also means for mainstream organisations in the way that they can support them in those journeys. Whereas we're sort of at a, on the cusp of, I think, of new endeavours in this space. Although you've been doing it for a long time, for a lot of other people, they have not. So thank you very much to you both for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us here today.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.